So it's when mental visualization starts to manifest and has connections that are brought from the universe to the individual.
Yes, something like that. I had a big one recently. A priest, a Catholic priest, came to the seniors group on Monday afternoon at the monastery that Tala does. And it turned out he is a Catholic priest who is very interested in Buddhism and teaches Zen Buddhism. And he had spent he's a man about my age, and he had spent a great deal of time with B. Griffiths in his ashram in India. He spent a great deal of time with the Dalai Lama, but while being also a Roman Catholic. And he appeared in my life. It turns out he's an Australian who lives in Armadale, like I do. Lives in the same town I do. And they, we're both interested in much of the same things. I went to visit him, and there on his table, what he's reading currently is somebody that I've heard a great deal about and seen on YouTube's named Tom Holland, who's a Protestant theologian, if I'm not mistaken. But, when you meet somebody and they have books you recognize beside their chair, you know even on that basis that you have a lot of things in common. And it turns out that he had also known Thomas Merton, who was interested in the East, and was doing interfaith work in Bangkok when he died from an electric heater falling into his bathtub and electrocuting him.
Yeah, I remember.
But my father had known Merton in the 30s in New York, in Columbia, and I have a book. Speaking of connections, I had a book that I only recently discovered is signed by the author to me on the 25th of October, 1960. And I never knew that. That book was never given to me. It just came to me through my sister after my parents were long dead. She was clearing out the books, and she said that I want these books, and she sent them a bunch. And there, about 3 weeks ago, I discovered in the title page is signed over to me, and I figured out that my father, who had this is a poet named Mark Van Doren, a New York poet, who was teaching in the English department in Columbia in the 30s and still at Columbia when I went there in 1960. My father had gone over to talk to his old professor, and he wound up getting this book, and he had him sign the book to me, but he never got around to giving me the book. It only came to me, when I was over 80 years old. And in it, there were slips of paper that showed the poems that my father was interested in. And one of those slips of paper was that it was a poem to Thomas Merton. And to this guy in Armadale, this priest in Armadale, when he saw that poem, he immediately took out his phone and took a picture of it. All the connections that suddenly popped out in a like a cascade of connections were quite amazing.
As you age and move closer to the transition of death, do you feel that the meditation and the spiritual path you're on at the minute brings you closer to meaning, or do you find you're actually kind of there enough to your own satisfaction already as far as meaningfulness?
Absolutely closer to meaning. Absolutely closer. How I would describe this, where I would used to go in my intellectual inner ramblings, I would go down rabbit holes, and I would go down other rabbit holes, and I would despair of how could it, I know they might be someday connected, but I have no idea. And what's happening to me now, even as my body is fading, is that those things connect. And, and if I start to go down a rabbit hole, I know how to get out of it because I know how to connect it to the other things. And so I learn new connections. It's like I won't say it's like having a different brain, but it's having, I've reached, what I think it is, I've reached critical mass, like an atomic explosion. Instead of just random collisions, I'm getting coherence, and it's building in some way, not as exponentially as an atomic explosion, hopefully, but it's really quite dramatic difference, and it's very, very it's really wonderful because I don't feel that I've wasted my life, and I think I'm a late bloomer. I think I was until I induced by practice that Kundalini experience about 2008, if I recall the date correctly. I was never gaining coherence very well, but since 2008, I've steadily gained coherence, and in my practice, I've gone through a wall where I can connect things in a way I never could in my life. So it's very, my reaction is I used to think, maybe I'll be absolutely terrified when I die, and and I was afraid of being terrified, afraid of being afraid, and now when I think of it, I'll be terrified or I won't. And I have no control over that. Let it go, it'll be what it is, and that's good enough.
That sounds pretty simple. For someone with such a complex mind and so much mental activity, that's a lot. That's a very simple place to get to, an insight to get to.
Right, yes. And it's part of letting go. You can't control how you're going to feel as you're dying. You may have huge amounts of pain, you may not. You may be terrified, you may have huge amounts of pain and be completely unterrified. You don't know what's going to happen.
Mm.
I had a friend who was working in the healthcare system a couple of years ago as a social worker, and he was not Australian, he was from Pakistan, and he was appalled at how highly developed, well-educated people who were dying in hospital were absolutely at a loss to deal with death. They hadn't really faced it at all. And, I can understand that given our culture that we can't think the unthinkable. And I'm to a point where I can't think the unthinkable, and it's no longer unthinkable. And so my attitude toward it is changing. And I can feel it as a release as well as a quite, as a really big deal. But
have you ever been tempted to live?
Not very important at all in the greater scheme of things.
Have you ever been tempted to live in a cultural area of the world which is recognizably more spiritual, India or Bhutan or Southeast Asia, where there's just more temples and there's more religiosity of the Asian variety, or even in Eastern Europe, maybe, or Greece, or somewhere where there's more of a contemplative respect for prayer? I mean, New York is kind of the antithesis of all of those things in a sense, somewhat.
Well, I visited some of those places, not Japan, not China, but Thailand and Cambodia and India. I've not been to Bhutan or Sri Lanka, but I'm aware of them as having particular spiritual things. And I was never strongly attracted to go there, but it was like I got married at 20 and divorced at 40 roughly, and it didn't, it just didn't happen that way. I didn't make the move that somebody like yourself has made, where you actually commit to take on, the vocation of a religious person. I've always felt embedded as a lay person. When I listen to the suttas where the Buddha talks to lay persons and treats them, takes them very seriously and takes their spiritual, potential very seriously. I always feel gratified by that because I feel like I'm naturally a layperson, not a monastic. Is just my nature. And if we have incarnation in this lifetime, next lifetime, I might decide to, as it were, to become a monastic. But it never was a strong draw in this lifetime.
If you've got a sort of canvas for your next lifetime, what would be some of the plot points you would put on that to create the life that you would wish to explore as a fulfilled person? If it was born on Earth, not necessarily.
I have the vague notion that I might want to go to be born in India or Africa, and because one of the things that's really strong in me is growing up on a farm. When I read the opening of the Dhammapada, that everything is led by the mind, like the
Ox.
The wheel of the cart follows the hoof of the ox.
Yeah.
I see the ox. I see the horse pulling things. I see the tractor pulling things. And when Christ talks about lost lambs and other agricultural metaphors, I sort of want to I want to somehow keep in touch with that, and I don't know whether being born in India or Africa is the way to do that. But it's it's sort of like I don't want to let the tradition. Agricultural experience get too remote. It's too big a part of me, and for it to be wish it was gone. But obviously, if the stories about people choosing their parents and choosing the circumstances in which they reincarnate, if that actually turns out to be the case, I don't know what I'll do, but I think I would. I don't want to be. I don't think I want to be all involved in transhumanism and other what I consider to be, materialist solutions.
So,
I want to be.
Suffice to say, like you could.
My roots in the earth.
You could easily be born in Rwanda or Kerala, South India, to a rural family, and there you would probably still have a great appetite for Carl Jungian philosophy and art and intellectual poetry and the writers, the same books, similar books. So that's quite interesting when you consider what some families and children are actually like. They've got very formed tastes already. So it's kind of an interesting, at this point in your life, to when you view the experiences of characters that we see, to think perhaps this is kind of how it works. As you get to the sort of termination years of life, you never know, you don't know how long you've actually got, that you could be in some intentional ways shaping up a rough direction to go in.
Yes, I feel that I'll feel that if anything like that has anything to do with whatever it turns out to be real, because we have what does Jung call it, the silent unanswering gateway that shuts behind the dead, that I will probably be, there will be some continuation of the things that me and others, like I don't know where family disappears and when that becomes irrelevant, or whether it's it's just you meet somebody in the course of your life and they have nothing in common with you in a family way or a national way, but there's some spark between you that feels like past life.
Great affinity.
Business and and my uncle was very much interested, and this is New York in the 20s, he was right into theosophy, Madame Blavatsky and Krishnamurti at the time, and he followed Krishnamurti out of theosophy and used to go listen to him in Ojai, California. I think I mentioned it before to you, but him and his son, who was my cousin and a few years older, he's gone now, he's died, but there was that influence, and I had listened to him talk to my father from the time I was a small child about Eastern religion, so that was something I didn't mention before. So I was sort of primed to, my father was always giving my father copies of the Gita, for example, my uncle.
I'm not sure what Krishnamurti thought about the Bhagavad Gita. I think he was fairly opposed to some of those ideas and the organization part of it, of the Brahmin.
Who was?
Krishnamurti.
Oh yes, I mean she tried to sell him as the new world teacher.
Yeah.
And
Golden Dawn.
She had a lot of qualities that were probably genuine, but she was the kindest thing you could say. She really was aware and very good at marketing.
Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky.
Using the projection, people who project their spirituality onto a figure who's going to do the work for them. And,
I think it was also
those people typically say, I've got the secret, and then they put people through all kinds of hoops and make a lot of money off it, and and all the rest of it.
I think it's also one of the things where we take some things for granted. When I looked at a little, I focused on her life for a little while, along with Madame Blavatsky, Helen Blavatsky, we're talking about, right? With Sir Henry Walcott, was the logistics. Now we take logistics for granted, but they were traveling with an enormous sort of carriage of books and things that we would now carry on your iPod, like on an iPhone.
Right, we would have them on a device, yeah.
Yeah, and languages and maps. We take language for granted. They were traveling all across India, where there's hundreds of dialects, trying to make sense of things. And then they were taking. She was so eclectic. She was taking from all over the place: Russia, folk mythology from Sri Lanka, India, Europe, and trying to cobble it all together.
That was good, genuine work.
Yeah, it's researching that we would be able to do on the internet in an instant now, but one answer might take a 200-mile journey and all the way back just to get that one little bit of information. We're much blessed with our lives, but an interesting study. So Krishnamurti and your uncle and Ojai. So shall we?
And he would say, back in the 50s, he would say that one of the lessons that he took from all that was that the minute you get two people interested in a religion, you get conflict. He would say it as exaggerating the situation, but so he withdrew from. He saw the problems of religious organizations that they start to fracture, and and all kinds of things, strange things happen. He became very aware of that from his experience of all the people competing to be at in the inner circle. It was what a lot of his stories of his previous experience of theosophy was. All the rumor and gossip and about and among the inner circle and the outer circles that were trying to get to the inner circle, and all that kind of business was what my uncle saw and was put off by in the end.
Well, it potentially shows possibly the wisdom of the Buddha that we're now 2,500 years away. There's still a pretty strong, coherent structure. It's not perfect, but the antithesis of that is just trying to do what Krishnamurti said, which is like, okay, no structure. If you have no structure among humans, something happens. I think it may have been a bit over-ambitious to assume that you can just do that and something good will work out. So I think the Buddha probably anticipated that he he tried to create something that was just enough, not too much, and not inject.
Yes, I think a good example of that is his refusal to get into metaphysical speculation. I think he cut off centuries of feudal intellectual argument.
The Buddha or
just cutting
Krishnamurti?
that dead.
The Buddha or Krishnamurti?
It isn't that you can't stop professors from arguing, but you can't completely do that. But he set a great example by saying, "No, I won't indulge in metaphysical speculation."
You mean the Buddha or Krishnamurti?
Yes, the Buddha. Yeah, I mean, I think that really. The first time I encountered that, I was a little confused by it because, all those perennial questions that human beings ask, he's saying, no, all you need to know is this is suffering, this is the Four Noble Truths, so this is the path to the end of suffering, and all the rest of it. And that's...
On that note, shall we call it a day? And it's been really good, as ever. So you don't mind if I'll put these up on YouTube? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Great.
Yeah, that's fine. It's, I'm getting less impressed with virtual space.
Never know. We might be getting reborn up there in the future sometime if things
we
keep.
Might be getting reborn in virtual space. Yeah. I heard a terrible story about the psychologists are beginning to understand the pathologies that are caused by anonymity, bringing out the psychopaths and on the net and things like that. They're beginning to become aware of what works and what doesn't. But I recently heard a story that woke me up, and that was these. There was a bunch of young teenagers in Jacksonville, Florida, that were like groups of young men competing with each other in a rap music scene, and the only trouble is they were murdering each other, and then going to the grave and doing another rap song, triumphantly bragging how they deleted them, and what was scary was the word deleted.
Murder's murder.
Don't quite get the difference between the virtual and the real world. Of course they know the difference, but of course they don't know the difference either. And it's not just naive kids that don't know the difference. It's people who make all kinds of statements that they wouldn't make in a room full of people because somebody might fumble. That they say things on the internet and they don't realize how they amplify attitudes and so forth that would be tamped down by physical presence.
Yeah.
Just out of common decency and avoidance of unnecessary conflict. And so people, college professors are acting out on Twitter, and presidents and everybody's doing it, and that just these feel so sorry of these young half-grown kids. They're still so young. You can see they haven't filled out yet, and they're being arrested for murder. What a miserable tragedy that is.
On that happy note. All right. Take care, my friend. Thank you so much, Lorenz. I really enjoyed talking once again.
I didn't think I was going to come out of the hardware, so I didn't think I was going to do an interview, but here it is. It's in the can, so do with it as you will.
All right. Take care.
Man.
Much love. Thank you, my friend.